Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we really try to break down some of history's most intense, overwhelming moments and pull out the core insights, however tough they might. Today, we're looking straight into, global catastrophe. Those specific points in time when everything just shattered, violent, unexpected.
That's right. And we're not just recounting events here. Our goal is a much deeper analysis, really digging into how these things work. We've got a whole range of sources: political violence, terrorism, even the sheer force of nature. We wanted to dissect the mechanic, how organizations responded or failed to respond.
And the human side, too. The investigations, the search for justice, how communities try to recover.
Exactly. It's all connected.
So we're covering a lot of ground today. It's quite a spectrum. We'll get into the forensic nitty-gritty of Lockerbie, Pan Am 103, and then compare that kind of focused investigation with the sheer chaos of coordinated attacks in cities like London or Madrid.
And Tokyo, too, with the sarin gas. That unseen threat is a whole different dimension.
Then we pivot, looking at systematic, state-involved violence in Rwanda, and contrast that with something completely indifferent like the Montserrat volcano eruption. It's this stark contrast, isn't it? The incredible speed of the destruction versus the often agonizingly slow process of putting things back together, finding answers, holding people accountable.
Precisely. The long, painful aftermath.
Okay, let's start up in the air then. Lockerbie, Pan Am Flight 103, December 1988. It still feels like such a defining moment for, aviation security and terrorism. When you look at the source materials, the physics of it are just staggering. Hard to even wrap your head around the forces involved.
Yeah, it's horrifying when you break it down.
Yeah.
The plane's cruising, 31,000 feet?
Yeah.
And then the blast happens, the fuselage basically starts to come apart, and the whole thing just plunges downward at over 800 kilometers an hour.
Yeah.
Near the speed of sound.
And all from a bomb hidden inside, a radio cassette player?
Yeah, Toshiba radio cassette player, packed in a standard Samsonite suitcase. Down in the forward cargo hold. It wasn't even a huge bomb, but it was just enough, placed correctly, to breach the aircraft's pressurized skin.
And the sources really emphasize that. It wasn't some super complex device needed, just the right explosive in the right weak spot. That aluminum baggage container didn't stand a chance.
Exactly. It was designed to tear through it. And once that structural integrity goes at altitude, it's immediate and catastrophic. The nose cone, the cockpit section, apparently separated almost instantly.
And what followed? The sources describe it as a 2-minute nightmare for those on board, witnesses on the ground seeing things fall.
Yeah, they described seeing what looked like a row of seats falling through the sky. Just awful to imagine.
And the impact on the ground in Lockerbie itself. We always hear the 259 on board, but the 11 people killed in the town when that wing section hit.
Unbelievable force. Still full of jet fuel. It basically acted like a bomb itself upon impact. The crater it left was huge. Displaced something like 1,500 tons of earth and rock. The fireball melted cast iron fences nearby. Just immense energy.
And the details from the forensic analysis are grim. Passengers facing gale force winds inside the broken plane.
Yeah, air sucked from their lungs, clothes torn off. And the really awful finding was that many were likely still alive, maybe conscious, during that long fall after the initial breakup.
Just unimaginable. So the investigation that followed had to be on a scale to match that devastation.
Absolutely. A huge 3-year effort. And incredibly initially led by the Dumfries and Galloway Constabulary.
Which was, at the time, Britain's smallest police force.
Exactly. Astonishing. But they had a massive backup, of course. The FBI, British military specialist teams. It was a huge collaborative effort. The sources really paint a picture of just how painstaking it was. They took over the local high school gym, Lockerbie High, turned it into this giant forensic lab.
And the search effort itself.
Incredible. A literal fingertip search covering 845 square miles of Scottish countryside. Every tiny piece of debris was tagged, bagged, labeled. Over 10,000 items processed in the end.
The key must have been piecing it all back together.
That was it. Reconstructing the fuselage from those fragments to pinpoint exactly where the bomb was. They eventually narrowed it down to that forward cargo hold. Found a distinctive hole about 20 centimeters wide, with blackening on the metal of the container nearby. Clear signs of an explosion.
But the real breakthrough was tiny, wasn't it?
Yeah, microscopic. A fragment of a circuit board from a very specific type of Swiss-made electronic timer. That was the golden thread that eventually led investigators towards Libya.
And this whole thing sparked a huge debate about safety, didn't it? Baggage security.
Oh, absolutely. Particularly the push for bomb-resistant luggage containers.
Yeah.
Some of the victims' families were adamant that these could have contained the blast. They're heavy, expensive, reduce how much cargo a plane can carry. It's that constant tension between cost, capacity, and security.
But there's also a process failure here too, right? The warning.
A huge one. Pan Am had received a very specific warning just days before. The Helsinki warning, it's called. Came from an anonymous caller to the U.S. Embassy there. Mentioned a bomb on a Pan Am flight involving a radio cassette player in a suitcase. Incredibly specific detail.
And that failure to act decisively on it, that's a theme we'll probably...
It often is. Then you have the political dimension. Initial intelligence pointed elsewhere, maybe Palestinian groups, Syrian involvement. But ultimately, the U.S. and U.K. governments steered the investigation firmly towards Libya, which led to that long standoff with Gaddafi.
And the trial itself, highly controversial.
Very. Just one man, al-Megrahi, convicted out of the 2 Libyans indicted, found guilty of 270 counts of murder. His life sentence came with a minimum term of 20 years. For the families, the maths was just brutal. Less than a month per life lost.
That must have felt like no justice at all.
For many, yes. And then his release in 2009 on Compassionate that reopened all the wound. The feeling remained, and still does for many, that the real masterminds, higher up the chain of command, were never brought to justice.
But amidst all that political complexity and grief, the sources really highlight the response of the Lockerbie community itself.
Oh, absolutely. It was extraordinary. Immediate, deeply human resilience. You had residents facing this absolute horror show, bodies literally in their streets, their gardens, sometimes for days before they could be recovered, and yet they just opened their homes and hearts, welcomed grieving families arriving from all over the world, offered tea, comfort, a place to stay. Just basic human kindness.
That connection forged in tragedy is powerful.
It really was. It created these lasting bonds between the townspeople and the victims' families that endure even now. A real contrast to the geopolitical mess surrounding it.
Okay, let's shift from that single devastating event in the sky to coordinated attack, London 77. This felt different, calculated.
Yeah, the timing was key. Hitting the morning rush hour, the synchronization was chilling. 3 bombs on the underground, detonated within just 50 seconds of each other, right around 8:50 a.m.
And the devices themselves.
Crude but effective. Homemade bombs, the sources say, using organic peroxide, packed into ordinary rucksacks, placed on the floor of the carriages deep inside to maximize the casualties in those crowded, confined spaces.
And then the 4th bomb, about an hour later, on the double-decker bus in Tavistock Square. That really amplified the fear, didn't it? It showed it wasn't just the tube network under attack.
It did. But that bus bomb location, Tavistock Square, had a sort of grimly positive twist in terms of immediate medical help.
How so?
It happened right outside the British Medical Association headquarters. So you had doctors, surgeons, nurses literally pouring out of the BMA building within seconds. They were providing advanced emergency care right there on the pavement almost instantly. An accidental but incredibly effective first response.
That's a stark contrast to what was happening underground.
Completely. The system locked down fast, but down in the tunnels, it was just chaos, darkness, thick smoke, trying to get people out. And the cell networks were overwhelmed, which seriously hampered communication and coordination for the emergency services initially.
So how did they cope with the casualties?
Hospitals went straight onto major incident footage, but getting the injured out and to hospitals was tough. They ended up using London buses, actually, as makeshift ambulance because regular ambulances couldn't easily reach some of the station entrances or navigate the lockdown city center.
And the types of injuries, typical of blasts in confined spaces.
Very much so. Severe fragmentation wounds from the bombs themselves and debris, broken bones, serious deformities from the blast wave, and terrible burn, especially internal damage to lungs and airways from inhaling hot gases and smoke.
The sources mentioned the bombers' motivations linked to the Iraq War and UK foreign policy.
Yes, that was the claim made in statements after. Opposition to UK support for Saudi Arabia and involvement in Iraq.
And this attack came just over a year after a similar, even larger tragedy in Spain.
Exactly. Madrid, March 11th, 2004, or 3/11, as it's known. That was on an even bigger scale. 10 bombs across 4 packed commuter trains. Killed 191 people, injured around 1,800 more. Just overwhelming.
And you see a similar pattern in the immediate aftermath.
You do. In Madrid, just like London. Ordinary people were crucial in the first minutes and hours. Taxi drivers, bus drivers, just passersby helping the wounded, getting them away from the scene before the official response could fully mobilize. That immediate human instinct to help in the face of shock.
Okay, so we've looked at conventional explosives. Now let's turn to something different, the unseen threat. Starting with the Tokyo Sarin attack in 1995. This was, well, unprecedented, wasn't it? Using a chemical weapon like that.
Utterly unprecedented in a modern urban setting like that. And sarin itself is terrifying stuff. It's a nerve agent developed back in Nazi Germany, actually. Yeah. Colorless, odorless, extremely potent.
And the method the cult, Aum Shinrikyo, used seems almost bizarrely low-tech for such a potentially devastating weapon.
It was chillingly simple and effective for the environment. 5 teams targeted 3 major subway lines right during the peak morning rush, around 8 a.m. They carried plastic bags or packages of liquid sarin, often wrapped in newspaper to look inconspicuous. Drop them on the floor of the train carriage.
And then just pierce them.
Exact. Use sharpened umbrella tips to puncture the bag, releasing the liquid, which then quickly vaporized in the crowded, enclosed space. Then they just got off at the next stop.
The lethality is hard to grasp. Sources say a single drop, pinhead size,
can kill an adult. It attacks the nervous system, disrupts breathing, causes convulsions, works through inhalation or even skin contact. Victims reported immediate symptoms: coughing fits, trouble breathing, eyes dimming, losing control of muscle. In the worst cases, bleeding from the nose and mouth before collapse.
And this wasn't some sudden impulsive act. Atham Shinrikyo had been working on this for a while.
Oh, for years. Their preparation was extensive and, frankly, quite bizarre. They'd actually used sarin before in a smaller attack in Matsumoto City in 1994. And later, police raids on their compounds uncovered huge stockpiles in secret labs. They weren't just making sarin, they were producing VX gas, too, which is even deadlier.
And they tested it.
Yes, the sources confirm they actually conducted tests using sarin on sheep way out in the remote Australian outback back in 1993. They were refining their chemical weapons and delivery methods.
The scale of their ambition is maybe the most terrifying part. Finding materials to make enough sarin to kill millions.
4 million people. That was the estimate based on the precursors found. It suggests they weren't just aiming for terror. They were potentially aiming for something apocalyptic.
But the actual attack in Tokyo, while horrific, also really exposed some major flaws in how a modern Tokyo responded, didn't it?
It absolutely did. It highlighted critical system failure. Institutional problems really compounded the effects of the chemical agent itself.
What were the main failures? It sounds like confusion played a big role.
A huge role. One major criticism was aimed at the subway authority. They failed to halt the trains immediately, even as reports started coming in about sick passengers collapsed. So the trains kept running, spreading the sarin gas further down the lines, contaminating more stations and trains.
And the hospitals were caught completely off guard.
Totally unprepared. Most hospitals had no idea how to diagnose or treat sarin poisoning. They were overwhelmed with victims showing these strange, frightening symptoms. Some hospitals even turned victims away initially because they didn't know what they were dealing with.
And the antidote, was there enough?
Not nearly enough, not initially. The specific antidotes needed, like pralidoxim, weren't widely stocked in urban hospitals. They had to scramble, getting emergency supplies rushed in from rural hospitals where they were more commonly kept for agricultural pesticide poison. That delay in getting the right treatment cost lives and worsened injuries.
But there was one hospital that stood out, St.
Yes. St. Luke's International Hospital. It was a real counterpoint to the general chaos. They had fortunately been designed with disaster preparedness in mind. Their facility could be quickly converted. They had extra oxygen lines already piped in. They ended up taking in over 600 victims, the most of any single hospital.
And their outcomes were better.
Remarkably so. They had 0 fatalities among the victims they treated. Part of it was infrastructure, but part was also quick thinking. There was a professor there who recognized the symptoms because he dealt with the earlier Matsumoto, and he immediately started faxing treatment protocols to other hospitals across Tokyo. That kind of individual initiative helped bridge the knowledge gap during the crisis.
Okay, from that invisible chemical threat, let's move to the blindingly visible, world-changing power of the atomic age. The bombings of 1945. This is destruction on a scale that still shapes everything today.
Absolutely. And you have to understand the context of the Manhattan Project first. The sheer scale, the secrecy. It's mind-boggling. We're talking nearly $2 billion back then. Over 130,000 people employed across the U.S., driven by this intense fear that Nazi Germany was going to get the bomb first. It was a joint push by Roosevelt and Churchill.
And the secrecy was absolute. Places like Oak Ridge, Tennessee.
Yeah, a purpose-built city of nearly 80,000 people working on uranium enrichment that didn't officially exist on any maps. Incredible level of compartmentalization security.
And this all led to the Trinity test, proving the weapon worked. But then came the decision where to use it.
That was a very deliberate strategic process. The target committee looked at several cities. They wanted places that hadn't already been heavily damaged by conventional bombing raids.
Why was that?
So they could accurately measure the bomb's effect. They needed a clear before and after picture. Hiroshima fit the bill perfectly. It was an important military HQ and industrial center large enough to demonstrate the bomb's power. Plus, the geography hills surrounding the city was thought likely to contain and focus the blast wave, maximizing the destruction in the city center.
And the result was total annihilation.
Pretty much. August 6th, 1945, Hiroshima was essentially flattened. Estimates are around 100,000 civilians killed instantly or within days. And then countless more died later from horrific burns, injuries, and of course the effects of radiation sickness, which were poorly understood at the time.
Hiroshima and Nagasaki didn't just end the war. They fundamentally changed, ushered in the nuclear age, the arms.
The world changed over. Hiroshima became this global symbol, not just of destruction, but also the start of the long, painful study of radiation's long-term impact on the survivors, the Bokusha, and their children.
And it spurred the Soviets to develop their own bomb, leading to places like the Mayak plant.
Yes, the Soviet equivalent of Hanford or Oak Ridge, their first major plutonium production site. And Mayak itself became the site of horrific nuclear accident and deliberate massive releases of radioactive waste into the environment.
That's a part of the story often overlooked, isn't it? The environmental cost of the arms race itself.
Absolutely critical. The Mayak plant contaminated huge areas of the Ural Mountains, rivers, lakes, sickening local populations who lived downstream and were never told about the danger for decades. It wasn't just the threat of war. The actual production created these vast ecological sacrifice zones from the Nevada desert to Siberia. That's a hidden legacy of the bomb.
And, of course, the fear of nuclear war fueled massive peace movements worldwide. Figures like Sadako Sasaki.
The young girl who folded 1,000 paper cranes hoping to be cured of leukemia caused by the Hiroshima bomb. She became such a powerful symbol of the innocent victim and the global yearning for disarmament. #3. Systematic atrocity versus unstoppable.
So we've talked about destruction through technology, chemical. Now let's shift to something starkly low-tech, intimate, systematic mass killing in Rwanda. What was the spark that ignited that horror?
The trigger was incredibly sharp and immediate. April 6, 1994. The plane carrying the presidents of both Rwanda and neighboring Burundi was shot down as it approached Kigali airport. Hutu extremists immediately blamed Tutsi rebels, though who actually fired the missile is still debated. But they used it as the pretext to unleash a genocide they had clearly been planning for some time. The killing started literally within hours.
And the scale, it's almost impossible to process. Over 800,000 people murdered in just 100 days.
The speed and intensity were terrifying. And the method. That's what makes Rwanda stand out in its horror. It wasn't industrial killing like the Holocaust.
It was face-to-face.
Overwhelming, carried out mostly by Hutu militia groups, like the Interamwe, but also by ordinary Hutu civilians armed with machetes, clubs, farm tools. They set up roadblocks everywhere. People were hunted down in their homes, villages, even in churches and schools where they sought refuge. Neighbors killed neighbors. Identification was based on ethnic identity cards, physical appearance, or just association. Age or gender made no sense.
Just pure, localized, intimate brutality, which makes the failure of the international community even harder to understand. The UN mission, UNAMIR, was already...
Yes, they were there, under Canadian General Romeo Dallaire, but their mandate was fatally weak. Their rules of engagement basically forbade them from intervening forcefully to stop the killing. They were peacekeepers, not peace enforcers. They could only fire if fired upon. So they were forced to be largely passive witnesses to the slaughter unfolding around them.
And then the murder of the Belgian peepers. That was a turning point, but not in the way you'd hope.
A terrible turning point. 10 Belgian soldiers who were guarding the moderate Hutu prime minister were captured, disarmed, tortured, and murdered by Hutu soldiers. Instead of reinforcing the mission to protect civilians, the international reaction, led by Belgium and the UN Security Council, was to pull out.
They cut the force.
Drastic. From about 2,500 down to a skeleton crew of just 250 soldiers. Right as the genocide was peaking, it was a catastrophic event. Kofi Annan, who was head of UN peacekeeping at the time, later famously admitted the international community failed Rwanda, calling it a lasting regret.
So as the Tutsi rebel army, the RPF, advanced and started to push back forces and start the genocide, there was another tragic fate.
Fearing revenge killings by the advancing RPF, over 1 million Hutus, including many who participated in the genocide, but also many innocent civilians, fled across the border, mostly into neighboring Zaire, now the DRC. But fleeing didn't mean safe. The conditions in those massive refugee camps were appalling.
Disease spread rapidly.
Cholera, dysentery. They ripped through the camps, killing tens of thousands more people. It was a secondary catastrophe. And then you had the controversial French intervention, Operation Turquoise, in the southwest of Rwanda. Ostensibly humanitarian, but heavily criticized.
Why was it controversial?
Because critics, including the new Rwandan government, alleged that it created a safe zone that primarily allowed the fleeing Hutu militia and genocide perpetrators to escape the RPF and cross safely into Zaire, taking their weapons with them. It complicated the path to justice later.
Just layers upon layers of tread. Okay, shifting gears entirely now. From man-made horror to the power of nature, Montserrat, the Emerald Isle of the Caribbean.
Yeah, a beautiful place. A small British overseas territory. Very lush, green, known for its relaxed pace. Maybe it's a recording studio where famous bands used to go.
Yeah.
And yes, those iconic red British telephone box. And looming over it all, the Soufrière Hills volcano, which had been quiet for, well, all of recorded history.
Dormant until 1995.
Right. Started with steam and ash venting in July 95. That prompted the first evacuation from the south, including the capital, Plymouth. People hoped it would just settle down again, but it did. The activity ramped up, culminating in major eruptions and dome collapses, especially in 1997.
And that's when the pyroclastic flows hit.
Yes. These are incredibly dangerous, fast-moving avalanches of superheated gas, ash, and rock. They swept down the volcano's flanks at hundreds of miles per hour, incinerating everything in their path. These flows, along with heavy ashfall and mud flows, basically rendered the entire southern half of the island uninhabitable, created a permanent exclusion zone.
And Plymouth, the capital,
was completely destroyed, repeatedly hit by flows and buried under meters. The sources say up to 1.4 meters, maybe more now, of ash and volcanic debris. It's often called a modern-day Pompeii, just frozen in time, entombed under volcanic material. Eerie footage exists of excavators trying to clear streets, revealing buried cars and buildings.
The human cost wasn't primarily deaths, though some tragically did die, but displacement, right?
Massive displacement. More than half the island's population, maybe two-thirds eventually, had to leave Montserrat altogether, scattered across the Caribbean, the UK, elsewhere. Those who stayed faced years of uncertainty, living in the safe northern zone, often in temporary shelters, having lost their homes, businesses, everything.
The source mentions the Blake's Bar.
Yeah, a specific example of the economic ruin. They lost their business, and crucially, after the volcano first became active in '95, insurance companies stopped covering volcanic risk on the island. So when the big eruptions destroyed everything later, there was no insurance payout. They, like many others, lost their entire livelihood with no financial safety.
Which led to tensions with the British government over aid.
Definitely. There was a lot of controversy and anger over the perceived inadequacy and slowness of British aid and resettlement packages. Residents felt abandoned. Eventually, significant investment did go into developing the north. A new airport was built because the old one was destroyed, and they started constructing a new capital town at Little Bay. But the island remains fundamentally divided. The recovering, inhabited north and the stark, gray, ash-covered badlands of the south, a permanent reminder of the volcano's power. #4. Justice, accountability, lingering.
So looking back across all these different kinds of disasters, a common thread seems to be the struggle for justice, for closure. It's rarely straightforward. Back to Lockerbie, that single conviction still rankles, doesn't it?
Deep. For the victims' families, the conviction and subsequent controversial release of al-Megrahi felt incomplete, unsatisfying. That calculation, serving less than a month per victim, it just underscored the feeling that the full truth, especially about who ordered the bombing higher up the Libyan chain of command, never really came out. Political expediency seemed to trump a full accountability.
And if you pull back and look at Lockerbie alongside London, Tokyo, Madrid, what's the takeaway about modern terror?
I think the chilling realization, confirmed by these sources, is that organized groups, even using relatively simple methods or weapons, have the capability and the intent to cause mass casualties by targeting civilian infrastructure, subways, airplanes, public squares. They're soft targets, and defending them completely is almost impossible.
And that realization sinks into the public consciousness.
It seems so. The sources mention this interesting detail, a noticeable spike in sales of things like gas masks and chemical protection suits in army surplus stores after events like Tokyo. It suggests people feel a need for personal preparedness, perhaps because they don't fully trust that institutions can prevent or effectively respond to every threat. It's not mass panic, but a low-level background awareness of vulnerability.
Now let's turn to a different kind of accountability failure, the deliberate erasure of history by a state. Tiananmen Square, 1989.
Right. This started, remember, with student mourning for Hu Yaobang, a reformist leader they felt had been unfairly purged, but it rapidly grew. It wasn't just students for long. Workers, intellectuals, ordinary Beijing residents joined in. At its peak, you had 1 million people marching, demanding democratic reform, an end to corruption. It became a genuine mass movement, which
the Communist Party leadership saw as an existential threat.
Exactly. Deng Xiaoping and the party elders viewed it as fundamentally challenging their authority. They labeled it counter-revolutionary turmoil. After some initial hesitation and replacing troops who seemed unwilling to act, they brought in hardline units from outside Beijing, soldiers with no local ties.
And then came the night of June 3rd into June.
The crackdown was brutal. The army moved in with tanks and live ammunition. Sources described chaos and violence, particularly on the avenues leading to Tiananmen Square, as troops forced their way through barricades and crowds. Tanks literally ran over people. Soldiers fired into groups of protesters and onlookers. While the square itself was cleared relatively bloodlessly by dawn, the killing happened all around it. The true death toll is still unknown, heavily disputed, but certainly runs into many hundreds, possibly thousands.
And yet, amid that state violence, we got that unforgettable image, the tank man.
Absolutely iconic. One lone, unidentified man just standing there, blocking a column of tanks the day after the main crackdown, holding shopping bags, stepping in front of the lead tank, refusing to move, briefly talking to the tank crew. It became this global symbol of individual courage against overwhelming state power. Just raw defiance.
But despite that image resonating globally, the Chinese government has been remarkably successful in suppressing the memory of Tiananmen within China itself.
Extremely successful. It's a masterclass in censorship and historical revisionism. The event is basically erased from official history book. Mentioning it online triggers immediate censorship. Media ignores it. Commemorations are banned. People resort to coded language like calling it May 35th just to talk about it online without being instantly.
So an entire generation has grown up with a huge gap in their history.
A deliberately created gap. And it's happened alongside China's massive economic boom. And so you have this strange contrast. Incredible economic liberalization, consumer freedom, travel, but political freedom freedom of speech, access to historical truth, those remain tightly controlled. The memory of Tiananmen is actively suppressed because it fundamentally questions the legitimacy of the party's rule.
So Tiananmen, like Rwanda in a different way, really underscores that awful reality of a state turning violently against, whether with machetes or tanks.
It's the ultimate betrayal, isn't it? The state using its power not to protect, but to crush its own citizens for demanding basic rights or for simply belonging to the wrong group. #tag outro.
Looking across all these incredibly varied disasters and atrocities, one thing that keeps standing out from the sources is how human action, human age sparks almost instantly in response, even when official systems fail.
That's a really key point. You see it everywhere. The Lockerbie investigators meticulously sifting through fields, the doctors running out of the BMA in London, ordinary people in Madrid using their cars as ambulance. There's this immediate improvisation, this impulse to do something that often precedes the more organized institutional response.
Yeah, it's like agency kicks in before the protocol. And the sheer scale differences are also striking. 270 killed at Horrific, but then 800,000 in Rwanda, 100,000 instantly in Hiroshima.
It forces you to look beyond just the numbers, doesn't it? You have to analyze why the failures happened. Was it a failure of intelligence analysis, like arguably with Pan Am, institutional rigidity, like the Tokyo subway, or a catastrophic failure of political will, like the UN in Rwanda?
The decisions made or not made by institutions and governments seem absolutely critical at determining the scale of the tragedy.
They absolutely are. They can turn a bad situation into an absolute catastrophe.
Which really brings us to a final thought, something for you, the listener, to maybe chew on. We've seen it repeatedly in these accounts. Specific, credible intelligence warnings existed before the event. Think about the Helsinki warning before Lockerbie, detailing the flight, the radio bomb. Think about the known dangers of Sarin before Tokyo. Think about the various alerts before 9/11, which we haven't even detailed today. The knowledge of potential catastrophe is often there. So the enduring question has to be, what is it? What are the consistent friction points, political, organizational, maybe even psychological, that prevent decisive action when we know a threat exists? And maybe more importantly, are we actually any better prepared today to act effectively on the warnings we inevitably